On Monday, a trial began in New York City in a case brought by the state of New York against Trump Enterprises, Donald J. Trump, Eric Trump, and Donald Trump Jr. And of all the legal problems that Donald Trump has right now, this case that's being brought by the state of New York has to be one of the most bizarre, ungrounded, unfounded things I've ever heard of. Don't know what I'm talking about? Hang on, folks. We're going to get into all this in just 1 second.
My name is Brian Trippett. I am your front porch conservative. Step on up to my electronic front porch and let's talk.
On Monday, a trial began in New York City, probably one of the most bizarre things I've ever heard of, but I'll explain why it's so bizarre here in just a little bit. We'll start with our coverage on this from an article from Axios, which sort of lays out the basics of what this case is all about. Headline: What we know about the Trump civil fraud trial in New York. Article written by April Rubin. Here's a basic breakdown of what's going on, folks. The lawsuit filed last fall by New York Attorney General Letitia James alleges net worth inflation, misleading valuation of assets, and misleading financial statements. James has alleged that Trump and people working for him made false entry in business records, falsified financial statements, and committed insurance fraud. His financial statements violated generally accepted accounting principles, James said. One example was using different methods to value different property. This lawsuit basically says that is entrenched over allegations of falsified business records that could damage his ability to conduct business in New York. Going a little bit further into the article, the lawsuit names other defendants, including two of the former president's sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump, Alan Weisselberg, the Trump Organization's ex-CFO, who was sentenced for a years-long tax fraud scheme within the former president's business, Jeff McConney, a former controller of the Trump Organization. What are prosecutors seeking? James is seeking to fine Trump with up to $250 million. The Attorney General also wants to bar him and members of his family from serving as officers or directors of a business registered in New York. Trump could lose control of key properties like Trump Tower, 46 East 57th Street, and Trump Park Avenue as a result. Who's presiding over the trial? Engoron, a justice on the state Supreme Court in Manhattan, will preside over the non-jury trial. He has served on the state's high court for 2 decades. On September 26, he ruled that Trump committed fraud by exaggerating his net worth and ordered sanctions of $7,500 for each attorney. How long will the trial last? It's unclear. The Washington Post reports, though, Orgeron has allotted 3 months. The trial will likely not be televised. Bottom line, Trump faces trials in 4 criminal indictments in addition to civil probes. He's capitalized on the court proceedings, including this one, to garner support for his 2024 presidential bid. Well, that's their opinion. All right, that's what the suit is all about. So, what happened on Monday? Well, we'll start with a statement from the man himself, Donald J. Trump. Well, needless to say, Donald Trump was going to let no opportunity go by to try and defend himself. We've got an opening statement from him, and we'll go ahead and play that for you right now.
Thank you very much. This is a continuation of the single greatest witch hunt of all time. We have a rogue judge who rules that properties are worth a tiny fraction, 1/100th, a tiny fraction of what they actually are. We have a racist attorney general who's a horror show, who ran on the basis that she was going to get Trump before she even knew anything about me. She used this to run for governor. She failed in her attempt to run for governor. She had virtually no polling. She came back and she said, well, now I'll go back to get Trump again. And this is what we have. It's a scam. It's a sham.
Well, as you might expect, Donald Trump is absolutely going to go out there and defend himself. So now we know what the trial is about. It's about a fraud claim that the state of New York has brought against the Trump organization, Trump, his sons, and a few other people. And we know what Trump's opinion of the whole matter is. So, how did day one go in the courtroom? Well, from the side of the prosecution, the judge, I guess, not too well, because the judge was none too happy about how the press and Trump's lawyers were treating him. Take a look at this headline from the New York Post. Judge at Trump civil trial implores media to stop saying he valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million. Article by Ben Kochman and Priscilla DeGregory. We read the following. The Manhattan judge deciding Donald Trump's fate at his civil fraud trial on Monday stood by the $18 million valuation of the former president's sprawling Mar-a-Lago estate, despite real estate experts blasting that estimate as utterly delusional. Justice Arthur Engoron again rejected Trump's claims that Mar-a-Lago is worth at least $1 billion in favor of a much lower valuation issued by local Florida officials. However, Engoron implored the media to stop reporting that he'd been the one to value the golf club and resort at $18 million, the low end of a determination made by the Palm Beach assessor that has left many real estate industry experts perplexed. One prominent Palm Beach real estate broker labeled the valuation as, quote, utterly delusional to the Post. Quote, please, press, stop saying that I valued it at $18 million, Engoron pleaded as the trial kicked off in Manhattan Superior Court in New York Attorney General Letitia James' $250 million lawsuit brought against the former president, the Trump Organization, and sons Eric and Donald Trump. Okay, I've got something to say about this. With all due respect, Your Honor, stop being a crybaby. You're the one on September 26th that said that Trump had overvalued his properties, Mar-a-Lago in particular. You're the one that made the valuation, God only knows how you did that, saying that Mar-a-Lago was worth only $18 million. You used that basis and other statements to come to the conclusion that Trump had committed fraud, and therefore you're letting this trial go forward. Now, if everyone out there is sort of wondering why it is that people are absolutely blasting this valuation that the judge reached on what the value of Mar-a-Lago is, well, take a look at this tweet from Anthony Hughes. This will give you some idea of what's going on here. About Mar-a-Lago, did you know the following? Number one, it's a National Historic Landmark. Number two, acquired by Trump in 1985, it houses over 126 rooms with more than 62,000 square feet. Number three, Mar-a-Lago means sea to lake in Spanish. And here's the kicker. Number five, in 2022, according to Forbes, it was estimated that the value of the estate was worth more than $300,000, with the highest valuation being at $725 million. And I'll read a couple of more items. The house has 58 bedrooms, 12 fireplaces, and 3 bomb shelters, but yet the judge says it's worth $18 million. Folks, I don't know a lot about real estate in Florida, but even I've got the common sense to know that a house, or I should say a structure with 126 rooms, of which 58 of them are bedrooms, and there are 12 fireplaces and 3 bomb shelters, and it's right on the coast of Florida with waterways going in and out of it, both inland and from the sea. There's no way in the infernal regions of hell that could possibly be worth $18 million. This judge is absolutely cuckoo, in simpler language that most everybody can understand. So, what statements were made, comments were made, back and forth between the judges, etc., and so on. What all did we get out of it? Well, pretty much the entire case, or most of it, went up in smoke, and I'll explain why. Take a look at this. This is from the Gateway Pundit. Trump's attorney, judge conceded the fact that the statute of limitations are in effect. all transactions that closed prior to 2014, which make up 80% of Letitia James's case, are now out of the case altogether. Article written by Christina Lela. President Trump and his lawyers on Monday spoke to the press outside a New York City courthouse after the conclusion of the opening day of the non-jury trial in a civil fraud case brought by Stalinist, that's a little over the top, I don't like him, but I don't know he's a communist, Letitia James. Trump and an attorney for Trump said the judge conceded that the statute of limitations is in effect on transactions that closed prior to 2014, which make up 80% of this case. New York Judge Arthur Engoron ruled last Tuesday that Trump and the Trump Organization are liable for fraud. The judge also ruled that Mar-a-Lago is worth $18 million. Of course, no one in the real estate business is buying this. Earlier on Monday, President Trump blasted the radical judge as he held up a new report from Palm Beach County. Quote, "Why are we trying a case that the appellate division of New York State has just recently ruled that we won 80% of our case, and this judge refuses to acknowledge that ruling, which is for all to see?" Trump continued, "This rogue judge, a Trump hater, refuses to acknowledge the fact that we won 80% of this case, including the statute of limitations. It just came out a few minutes ago from Palm Beach County. The judge valued Mar-a-Lago at $18 million, and it's worth at least $1 billion, maybe $1.5 billion," said Trump. Trump and his lawyers emerged from the courthouse after the court session ended on Monday afternoon. President Trump said Judge Engoron conceded that the statute of limitations are in effect. A lawyer for Trump spoke on this, quote, "Based on the judge's comments at the end of the trial, it would appear that he is agreeing with that all the transactions that closed prior to 2014 are out of the case." Trump chimed in, which is about 80% of the case. So, you got a judge in Palm Beach County who's come to the conclusion that 80% of the transactions involved in this case that Letitia James has brought in New York State don't really matter because they were closed prior to 2014 and the statute of limitations is recognized. Well, apparently now Engoron is either recognizing this fact or will be recognizing it at some point in the trial. So these are the facts in question. But what is this really all about? And does anything in this case make any sense? Okay, at this point, I'm going to defer to a couple of very intelligent men. If you are not regular followers of Viva Frei and Robert Barnes, I recommend that you do so. These are two very sharp gentlemen. One is a lawyer from Canada. Barnes is a lawyer here in the U.S., and they host a show on Sunday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to play you some clips from this and let this speak for itself, because I'll tell you what, between Viva Frei and Robert Barnes, they can dissect this thing, did so in basically about 20 minutes. Now, we're not going to listen to the whole 20-minute clip, but I'll tell you what, some of what they say in this is absolutely amazing. So we're going to start with the question of how can Letitia James bring this case? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. So we're going to start with that opening question. Folks, take a listen to this.
I mean, really, it's these dangerous state laws that linger on the books that give the state the right to bring suit without any finding that the state itself has ever been defrauded. I mean, it shows you what a joke standing doctrine is. You know, they don't allow the vaccine injured to sue because somehow they don't have standing. But the not just the immunity laws, we challenge the FDA. Oh, no, you don't have standing. But if you've not been defrauded a penny, nickel, dime, or dollar, you have no complaining victim, the state has lost no money. In fact, the state has gained money. Then you get to sue and destroy someone's business. So there were two aspects that were absurd about this. The other aspect is they didn't just sue the Trump organization. They sued Trump and his kids. I mean, his kids had nothing to do with this. Eric Trump is part of this judgment. I mean, Donald Trump Jr. is part of it. It's utter, and they knew that the kids had nothing to do with it. It's pure retaliation. As Carl Benjamin said, former Sargon of Akkad from the social media part of the Lotus Eaters podcast, when he was on Tim Pool, he's like, you don't have a country anymore.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy opening statement. But it doesn't just stop from there. They also went on to ask the question, well, you know, what about the banks? I mean, are they really being defrauded here? Well, needless to say, Barnes had a quite appropriate opinion on that question. Folks, Take a listen to this, because again, you talk about some truth bombs getting dropped here. That's exactly what Robert Barnes is doing.
The idea that a bunch of the world's most sophisticated banks lent money without knowing what the value of the Trump brand is utterly preposterous.
Just
That
let
by
me.
itself, they could not have been defrauded. They never claimed to have been defrauded. No, not an attempt to defraud, not an existence of defraud, because they will have had their own. These were massive deals. They would have had their own independent appraisers, their own independent brand assessors.
Talk about blowing. You know, it's a darn shame from my perspective that Barnes isn't on this case for Trump. So the law that allows the state of New York to do this has apparently been on the books for years. If the state of New York feels that there's been fraud, they can bring a case. In spite of the fact, ladies and gentlemen, that the banks in question, the insurance companies in question, have never claimed fraud, in spite of the fact that the loans that they made to Donald Trump were paid back with interest, which means the state of New York made money off the banks. And think about this. And as I used to work in banking in another lifetime in my occupational career, I understand this very important point. Does anybody really think that a bank is going to loan out multiple millions of dollars and not have a complete idea of what the value of the property is worth that's being offered up as collateral? That's absolutely crazy. But it goes on. Another statement about whether or not the banks didn't know the value of what they were getting. Again, take a listen to this.
This precedent. You can defraud nobody. You can have done one of the most sophisticated business deals in the history of man. You're talking about deals in the 8 figures, deals in the 9 figures. The idea they didn't know. I mean, Trump had gone through a bankruptcy before. You don't think the banks didn't know exactly the value of the loan, the value, the likelihood of paying back that loan? That's utterly ludicrous.
Oh, folks, and it just keeps getting better. I mean, honestly. And Barnes's point is completely valid. Does anybody really think these banks are going to lend this kind of money and not know what they're getting, what they're holding? I mean, and Barnes brings up a perfectly valid point, and that is Trump himself had gone through a bankruptcy. Seriously, they knew who they were dealing with. And you don't loan out this kind of money, 8, 9-figure dollar amounts, and not know exactly what's going on. But a couple of more points in this. Where's the fraud? Well, Barnes addresses that. Take a listen to this.
So it's ludicrous on its face, but Trump defrauded nobody. The fact that he's been found guilty of civil fraud when they cannot say that there was a single victim ever, that everybody was richly rewarded, including the banks. They cannot prove that the banks thought they were ever misrepresented. There's no testimony in the record. The banks think that anything was ever misrepresented to them.
But the banks evaluated the assets themselves. There's no question about that.
And what the judge is trying to hide is the fact that the banks came in with the same valuation that Trump came in with.
Okay. Let's get that little factoid out there. You mean to tell me that Trump's lawyers have the ability to prove before the courts, God, and everybody that the banks went in, did their own independent valuation on these properties that the Trump organization put up as the collateral to make these loans, and these independent appraisers came in at the same mark that Trump told them these properties were worth? Well, then, with all due respect, what the hell are we even having this trial for? Folks, this trial is utterly ridiculous. Absolutely and utterly ridiculous. There's not one reason in the world why Letitia James should be bringing this trial. If a judge in Palm Beach County, Florida, which basically is covering the same territory that Letitia James is, has come to the conclusion that 80% of the transactions involved in this trial are basically done and you can't talk about them because of statute of limitations, this judge ought to throw that part of it out. And now we're down to the question of, was anybody really defrauded? Well, if the banks aren't claiming fraud, the insurance companies aren't claiming fraud, the banks were paid back every penny that they were owed with interest. If the state of New York made money off of the transactions, then with all due respect, what the hell is this all about? I'll tell you what this is about. This is about Letitia James. This is about Fannie Pack Willis down in Georgia. This is about Jack Boot Smith in Washington, D.C., all working to do one thing: get Trump. They've got to get something on the books and make it stick. They've got to get a trial to say he's guilty. And worse yet, this is a civil trial, not even criminal. The risk for Trump is that he might lose the ability to do business in New York City and have assets taken away from him. And for what? Because they don't like Trump. Now, people are going to say I'm being biased toward Trump in this, but folks, when you lay out the facts in question, there's no way this trial ought to even be going forward. There's no injured party. No one is hurt in this. Trump went into a bank, said, I want a loan. Here's a property. I want to use it as the collateral. The bank went out and checked the value of the collateral. They said it made sense. They did the deal. Trump paid the bank back. He paid them back with interest. Where is the victim in this? Well, the New York State says they were defrauded. How were they defrauded? They were making money off of the banks from the taxation. So if the banks made money, the insurance companies didn't have to pay out any money, and the state of New York made money off the taxes they would have taxed the banks, where's the victim? There is none. This trial ought to be absolutely thrown out on its ear, and probably will be on appeal, because I got a feeling I know what's going to happen. This Cheshire cat grinning eating judge, and that's exactly the kind of look he had on his face when Trump sat down in the courtroom, he's probably going to rule against Trump. If I had to guess, in spite of every piece of evidence that says he ought to rule for him, he'll probably rule against him. This thing's going to go up on appeal. And the meanwhile, as opposed to Trump fighting Joe Biden in the political arena, he's having to fight the legal arena. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a crying shame. But that's what I think about it. What do you think about it? As we start to wrap up this video, please do me some favors as always. Number one, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please do so. Number two, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear what you think about all this. Number three, hit the bell for notifications. I want to make sure you're always aware when new material is coming out. Number four, please share the video around. And finally, give me a thumbs up. My name is Brian Trippett. I am your Front Porch Conservative, and I'll see you